Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, October the 20th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to start by thanking our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every week. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. So the election was yesterday, and I've got the headline here in the Globe and Mail, Trudeau triumphs. But I realized that Trudeau actually didn't triumph. He didn't win a majority government. He got 40% of the vote. So it's that old story of how we don't really get what we voted for. We voted 40% for the Liberals, but they've got about 55% of the seats and an ongoing majority government which will allow them to rule 100% for the next 4 years. And I found out something else today too, which I found very interesting. My recollection of the election is basically this. The Liberals and the NDP were very close, but the NDP was always ahead. And then came the French language debate in which the niqab issue came up. And we were told here in the rest of Canada that because of what Mr. Mulcair said in that debate about whatever, suddenly his popularity began to go down, and it was like that until the very end. And in the end, the NDP did very poorly, but it was that began it. But yesterday I found out that the Liberal position on the niqabs was exactly the same as the NDP's position. So why were we suddenly told that the NDP's position was bringing them down in the polls when the Liberals, who had exactly the same position, there was nothing negative attached? And then I saw this today in a great newspaper called People's Voice, and it says 150,000 rally in Montreal against austerity. Now there's an issue, austerity. And yet this story happened virtually at the same time as the niqab issue, but this story was never told to us. And just to read a couple of sentences from the story inside, it says, Front Commune rally draws 150,000 workers against Quebec austerity attack. And so big things were happening in this country that we were never even told about. We were given another story. It was used as an excuse to denigrate the NDP when the Liberals had exactly the same position. And you begin to wonder, is the entire election a something?
A puppet show.
A puppet show.
You know, I don't know either. You know, you just have to wonder. I checked the numbers, you know, the NDP were at almost 40% support in mid-August, and began a long slide down to 20%. No one thing seemed to have occurred to interrupt that long slide. The NDP had a bit of a lackluster campaign, but nothing substantial. Mulcair looked okay in the debates generally, nothing surprising. And my view is that high rating at 40% was not true. I think that was invented by the pollsters. However, they managed to invent this stuff. And I think they were using that as a tool to manipulate voters. So that's number one. The niqab issue, again, the Conservatives invented that with their Hill and Knowlton advisors, while the NDP and their Hill and Knowlton advisors bid onto it, and they went in opposite directions on it. It looked like a fake issue both ways, looked like a distraction issue, which most people understood it to be. But again, it looked like a Liberal or an NDP conservative collaboration of some sort.
And you know, you mentioned Hill and Knowlton. And so Hill and Knowlton is this, can I call it evil, a public relations firm that was complicit in starting the first war against Iraq, the first American attack on Iraq. The American people did not want to attack Iraq in 1990 or 91, so Hill and Knowlton was hired to make the war happen, and they did. They created a story about Iraqi soldiers coming into a hospital in Kuwait and basically taking babies out of their incubators, leaving them on the floor to die, and that so inflamed opinion, but it was all a lie. So that was Hill and Knowlton. So here today, the chief advisor to the NDP, the chief election advisor to the NDP.
That's right.
Is a vice president, I think, with Hill and Knowlton.
That's right.
And the recently resigned co-chair of the Liberal Party also works for Hill and Knowlton. Remember, it works. They work for Monsanto. They work for the frackers. They work for third world dictators who want their images brightened up. I don't know what else you can say about Hill and Knowlton, but
Well, let's
what
not
are they
forget
doing?
that the
The Conservative Party.
Conservative Party, Harper's party, his chief communications officer resigned early in the spring to go to Hill and Knowlton.
Right.
So Hill and Knowlton's all over this thing. You know, they're all over all three parties.
And
God
again-
knows how much. We really don't know how much.
So what does it mean? I mean, I really want to hope that, you know, the election that just happened and the election of this young man
Yeah.
to be our prime minister, with all the promises that were made, I mean, I really hope at least some of that is going to happen, but I don't have much faith. I fear the other side may be more correct, which is that the entire thing is, as you called it, a puppet show, and the corporations control all the levers. They do own all the media. They control all the political parties, I think. I'm sure you think.
Yeah.
And the next 4 years are, I mean, these guys work for corporate Canada, just like Mr. Harper did.
Well, there's a hell of a lot of influence. You know, do they control it 100%? Well, I don't know how to measure that, but if you look at the power that these PR firms have, you know, it's not just lobbyists in Ottawa going in and asking for favors. We're talking about, you know, thousands of people involved in shaping policy, writing laws, you know, going in and pretty well plunking the paper down in front of the politician and saying, there's your legislation, you know, and like Bill C-51 and all that stuff, I doubt was ever written by anybody that we know of. You know, these things are all done in the back rooms. It is a very dark thing, a very dark thing about politics, and particularly in Canada, where we're hoping for something better. These forces are upon us, and Harper was a prime example of that because he was the forefront. They really had their man in place, and he changed Canadian society in the years that he was there. We have a lot of work to undo, a lot of really gruesome laws and a lot of bad things, and really divided our society. You know, just some bad things happen, but that's obvious. But underneath, there's another whole thing going on all the time, and we just simply have allowed this to go on for too long. I really think we have to be more vigilant and to try to root out these sort of influences and not allow it to happen.
And when you say these sort of influences, what do you
Well,
mean?
that's a public relations world that's influencing our politics.
Yeah. And the public relations world works for is the
Well,
corporate
obviously,
world.
they're paid by corporations,
Yeah.
paid for by corporations. All the public opinion pollsters, they're all paid for by corporations.
So I think you and I would agree then that what's happening, we fear, we don't know, but we fear, is that at the top running this country are the corporations, and through public relations firms, they control all the political parties, and at the same time, they own all the media, every television station,
Yeah.
every radio station, every big newspaper, everything. So they completely control the message.
Yeah.
And that's the way they control us.
Well, sort of, but you know, you have to realize that collaboration. I mean, if you look at the major banks in Canada and the power that they have for allowing interest rates to fluctuate, controlling the money supply, how quickly they could put a grip on the Canadian economy. And any politician all politicians know that, it's out of their control. So you have that issue. Then you have the corporate media ready to jump on anything that they want. They dearly love to get something on a politician. They can steer him around that way. You have all sorts of candidates with all sorts of agendas that God knows what they are, that a lot of them are related to corporations before they go into politics. And of course, then you have the straight-ahead public relations people that go right from PR firms right into politics, become candidates, and get elected.
And the other way around.
Yeah.
You know, the people who work building, you know, and probably start off as the idealistic young person in the Liberal Party, NDP Party, or Conservative Party, but they're the kind of person who wants to make a career out of it, and they do, because you can make a career out of that kind of stuff. And then you go to work for a Hill and Knowlton or somebody else, and you have all the contacts, and all these people kind of want what you've already got, which is whatever it is. And somehow we've got to, we the public, the people of the country, have got to completely regain control of our political parties. We've got to have public oversight, because this, I mean, the corruption and you know, it happens within political parties for sure. We all know it. And if there's no public oversight, and there isn't, then imagine how just a corrupt mess those things can become.
Well, you know, should you list the dozens and dozens of transgressions over the last 10 years from the Harper regime? It's just a sad story. You know, Jack, about 32% of the electorate voted Conservative this time.
And I don't blame them.
You know,
I
that's
honestly don't blame them.
that's a hefty bunch of people, and
because they believe a story, which is the nice story told about Mr. Harper and what he's doing. He's anti-crime, he's good for the economy and the environment. And, you know, for me, most of my life, I believe the NDP story, which is that they're there to take care of...
the facts have been established pretty clearly with the corruption around the Senate. You know, the way this trade deal has been negotiated and finalized recently in secret. Internationally, you read about these trade deals, people are really up in arms. I mean, the facts are pretty established. That's a pretty corrupt organization, the Conservative Party. I mean,
but are the other parties any better? I honestly ask that.
Okay, yeah, it's hard to say, but we know this one is. We know the Conservatives are quite corrupt.
Well, I'm a member of the NDP. We just went through an election.
Yeah.
At no time in the years leading up to the election was there any effort by the leadership of my party to find out what I and all the other members wanted, as far as I know. They're always asking for money, and basically, the membership is completely out. The party is run by professional politicians, and they're doing very, very well.
What I think
but
the Canadian
it's not
society
democratic.
has been segmented more, let's say, the radical right wing, let's call them, because that's how I view them, which are have a lot of fascist tendencies, have been endorsed here by over 30% of the population, and amongst all this media coverage of how corrupt they are. So I think we've been sort of Americanized our politics more in the last 10 years.
I have a different point of view. The media presents Mr. Harper, for example, as tough on crime. And if you believe the story, and I don't believe the story, but if you do believe the story, and you live in places where you're worried about crime, then you support Mr. Harper. You're also told that he's good for the economy and he never has any deficits. Well, the truth of the matter is he ran about $170 billion worth of deficits. He ran the largest deficit in Canadian history, but the public is never told that, so they believe the misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things happen. I think you call them our intelligentsia, excuse me, have abandoned us. There's no real criticism going on in a high level that's accessible. Maybe you and I might go online and know places to go to find information, but there is a problem with information. And
I guess that's the media. The
papers have a lot of power.
Failure, the absolute failure of the corporate media in this country to tell the people of Canada honestly what's going on. And of course, it's not a failure, it's actually a great success. It's their greatest success, because that's why the corporate media exists. And we have to face up to this issue that our greatest enemy, really, in daily life is the corporate-owned media, which controls everything and will destroy this country and everything in it to amass wealth and power, which is all the corporations care about.
Yeah. There's a serious, serious problem there. Now I'm gonna just change the subject slightly, but it's gonna be still on the same topic more or less. I looked at some statistics at Fair Vote Canada, and that's pretty easy to remember. Fair Vote Canada. Go there, take a look at some of the things they're talking about, and you can really see about how these majority governments are really dictatorships, because once they have the power, they don't have to have any approval from the rest of the parliament, which really is unfair. But what was stunning, and I didn't check the numbers like for quite a long time, but we had the Liberals who got 7% more vote than the Conservatives. 7%.
More votes than the
More
Conservatives.
votes.
Okay.
But they won 85 more seats than the Conservatives.
Right.
So we're looking at a first past the post system here that really rewards large political parties and big winners.
Yes.
And basically what happens, if you look at how voting goes, if you're around the 28%, 30% mark, generally you'll get just about the same amount of seats, for 28 or 30% of the seats. But as those numbers grow, up to 35% and up to 37 or 38%, it's exponential how many more seats you get. It just explodes. Now, that's quite shocking, but if you could look back at the 2011 results, the Conservatives, it's a mirror image. The numbers are almost exactly the same, where they only had 6 or 7% more of the vote, and bang, they had a massive majority.
So, in that election, in the last election, the Conservatives got 6 million votes, and the Greens got 600,000 votes, so 10 times as many.
Yeah.
But the Greens elected 1 MP, and the Conservatives elected 166.
Yeah.
So it took 600,000 voters to elect 1 Green MP. It only took, I think, 35,000 voters to elect 1 Conservative.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the media comes in, because they can manipulate that extra few percent one way or the other.
Yeah.
And it gives them tremendous power. If Canada had proportional representation, this entire election would have been different, because we would have known from the beginning that it would be a coalition government. And then maybe we could talk about the important issues instead of...
Great things happen under minority governments, and almost everything we have for Social Security and unemployment insurance and all that all came when we had minority governments, and governments had to pass it. Now, under proportional representation with the voting that occurred, instead of 184 seats, the Liberals would have had 135.
135, not a majority.
Not a majority. Conservatives, instead of having around 100, they would have had 109. The NDP, instead of having 44, I wish I knew the other fact, but they would have had 68, would have had quite a few more. The Bloc would have had 15, and the Green Party would have had 11 representatives.
Yeah. And actually, if we had proportional representation, the Green vote would probably
Even
go
go
up
up more.
to 7, 8, 10%.
Yeah.
So they would really have a lot of seats.
Now, there was a lot of, talk about strategic voting, and there was a couple organizations online telling everybody to vote strategically and all that, which was totally misguided. The NDP were always running a campaign, they said, to get rid of Harper. Well, they were on a campaign to get elected here against the Greens, and that was not, it was a kind of a red herring, right? But the thing is, we desperately need some type of proportional representation. Now, the Liberals have promised to give us that.
This was a big promise, and let's see where that promise goes. I hope for the best, but I fear
Yeah.
the worst. Yes, they have promised a good process
Yeah.
to find out what the people of Canada want, I think, and then give it to us. Let's see where that promise
We have to
goes.
fight for it, Jack. Now's the time for us to really go after the government. They've made some promises. If you just put massive pressure, they can't ignore it, and they can't slip these things on by. And I think the public should be really ready to do whatever it takes to get some of these promises upheld.
I think that's absolutely right. And here are some of them, or some. Will the Liberal government label or get rid of genetically contaminated foods, which a large majority of Canadians want? What about the TPP deal? It's been agreed to by Harper. It has to be passed by Parliament. The Liberals now have majority. They don't have to pass it. What are they going to do with that? Bill C-51? voting
they said
reform?
they're going to go for some oversight committee to govern that better.
The legalization of cannabis?
Yeah.
How about taxing the corporations to build homes for the people that have been deliberately put out on the streets by the corporations
Yeah.
who control our economy?
Yeah, I think something very substantial has happened, though. I mean, the Trudeau victory is something to mark. I think it's important. I actually believe that Justin Trudeau is a sincere and honest person. But he's just in a den of darkness with all those people around him that have run this show for so long. So I don't know how he's going to withstand that. But we have to support him, and I think if he knows he has the public support, he's going to be able to do some things that are good. And he has to stop listening to those advisors all the time, because they'll just drag you right down, as the NDP now know.
Walter, I really, really, really hope you're right. And if you are, then I say but let's see what happens.
I think we got a chance.
And we have to also factor into it that, in fact, he's not the nice young man, but he's somebody who's very happy to work for the dark side in order to get ahead. That's a possible too.
I don't sense that. I don't. If you looked at Justin Trudeau over the election campaign, right from the very start, you just could just say this is different. You know, whenever he spoke in a certain way. And it wasn't this scripted wooden gesture. Mulcair just looked like he was, I don't know.
A good public speaker, yeah.
But he really looked like he was acting. And of course, Harper's, he looked like he was beamed in from another planet.
Walter, I really, really, really hope you're right. And we're out of time. Thank you, Walter.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back. This is segment 2 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Jordan Reichert, and Jordan is with the Animal Alliance Environment Voters Party. And Jordan, you ran in Victoria. The election was yesterday. So do you want to just say something about the Animal Alliance Environment Voters Party and the election experience?
Yeah, well, it's honestly been a great experience, and Jack, thanks so much for having me on today. I want to say that too, of course. It really was a great experience. I really appreciate how kind all the other candidates were. I mean, they all welcomed me. I remember my first debate. I got up there and I'm like, okay, I'm with Murray Rankin and Joanne Roberts and people who have experience speaking at these kind of things and who are very well supported and such. And they were very nice to me, so I really appreciate that. And just the whole process, seeing what goes on in the inside workings of political campaigns and how that all comes together. And of course, Animal Alliance to me was just simply a value choice. When I thought about what my values were and what I needed to represent in this election, there wasn't a party that really did that for me. And so talking to Liz White, the leader of the party, we talked and she said, yeah, go for it. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm gonna take a chance here and make this happen. And it's been great. Animal Alliance represents the idea that we can't just talk about politics, we can't just talk about the environment, we can't talk about the economy, healthcare, any of these issues that affect us both locally and nationally without including non-human animals in that discussion. And none of the other parties really include non-human animals in that in their political discussion, in their platforms in any meaningful way. And it's really to the detriment of us all because they are embedded in our world. They're embedded in our relationships with one another. Obviously people have cats and dogs, but obviously there's the huge animal agriculture industry that is the greatest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the world, greatest contributor to environmental destruction in the world, and yet nobody's talking about this publicly when they're talking about the environment. And so it was my job this election to go in there to these debates and make sure I was bringing up these issues, making sure I was holding the other parties accountable for what they weren't saying more than what they were in some cases.
So the election is over. Is anything changing in now? I would say,
Yeah.
really, you have to say no.
That's
I mean,
a great
it's not-
question,
It's
yeah.
not even an issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Stephen Harper's gone, which we can all be, I think, thankful for. But I mean, the Conservatives still got a lot of power. They still hold a large number of seats. They still got a large percentage of the vote of those who voted. And I'm not sure what the Liberals are going to bring different to the table necessarily. Obviously, there seems to Justin Trudeau's fairly is untested waters, so we'll see what he does bring and whether he follows through on some of his election promises, such as proportional representation, which obviously our party certainly hopes mixed member proportional representation comes into effect, because we've seen animal parties in European parliaments get elected and in other European countries.
So how many people do you think you represent? Because, for example, I think in many ways you represent some things I want. Can I say I eat meat?
Well, absolutely, yeah. And I mean,
So, but I really think the whole industry should be, for our own health, a lot smaller.
yeah.
And certainly anything within it should be not treated in the most horrendous ways. I mean,
Right.
it really is disgusting.
It is, and there's a reason why, slaughterhouses are hidden from view, and
Yeah,
people.
and not only the slaughterhouse, but the entire life cycle of these animals.
Absolutely, it is.
horrendous.
I mean, there's.
Why don't we talk
there-
about it?
Yeah, there's the picture of, Thomas Mulcair feeding a baby calf 2 days old in the election campaign, and I'm thinking to myself, 2 days old, that baby calf is being used already as a political pawn, and it was probably taken from its mother within less than 24 hours of being born. And that the milk from that mother is going to be given to humans who don't need it. And I mean, the whole system itself is extremely exploitive. It's extremely violent at every stage. You're absolutely right. But we have to go back to that first question: who does this affect, right? Or who does this matter to? And I wrote a blog article called "Canada's Disposable Citizens." Okay, and the idea behind that essentially is that over 1 billion animals are killed every year in Canada for food. You've got over 750 million animals killed by the meat industry. You've got about 1 million animals being used in the dairy industry. You've got another hundreds of thousands of tons of animals being taken out of the oceans and sold for export or eaten here or whatever it is. A lot of those animals are being just ground up and fed to other animals. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of clean water, and nobody's talking about them. They really have no representation, these billion individuals in our world. And so when we talk about things like representation and democracy, and the fact that we've got a great concern of ours, of course, is that we've got the 1% here dictating how the other 99% are going to be living their lives. We have to look at, well, there's an even smaller 1% in many ways of humanity that is dictating how the real 99% in my mind are going to be used and exploited. And so without addressing that, we're not, and you did bring up, of course, meat, that you eat meat and such. And, I think that one of the greatest things we can do is educate people and show people the opportunities about a plant-based lifestyle, right? Obviously, we don't expect everybody is going to just go vegan, right? Would that be maybe the best thing? Well, according to the United Nations, perhaps, that's maybe what we need to actually stop climate change in the current direction it's going. Maybe that's what we need to save the environment. But, we can't just make people do that. We have to show people, I think, compassionately what the benefits of a vegan lifestyle are, and we have to extend that same compassion
that should
to
be a
them.
whole industry, because it will make, I think in many ways, make people healthier. Certainly everybody can, not everybody, lots of people can reduce their meat consumption if they want to.
Absolutely.
Probably be healthier for it, be very good for the environment, and save some money as well. So, I mean, it's an opportunity for us, especially as the food supply begins to dwindle under climate change. You know, we're going to need, you know, so, I mean, it's there, and yet it's never, I mean, the poor vegan industry, you never hear about them. They're never mentioned in the media. It's like underground, you never hear it, but you always hear about Coca-Cola. And
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a great documentary called Cowspiracy, which I highly recommend to people because it talks about the suppression of information and the suppression of political parties and of media outlets from basically talking about the ill effects of the meat industry on our environment and on individuals' health.
Yeah, we deserve to know. We have the right to know, but they won't tell us.
We do have a right to know, and that's the thing, is like and this is part of my issue with the other political parties. It doesn't matter which one you choose, they're all singing the same song here, is that they're not talking about it. And if they're not talking about these issues, if they're not willing to represent them, then what else are they willing to keep from the public, right? What else are they not willing to talk to the public about, right? I mean, we're talking about something that could be the most crucial piece of protecting our earth today, right? Of protecting our own lives, right? Even if people don't care about the well-being of non-human animals, right? Then they can still look at these issues and say, well, this is good for me, if they want to just look at it that way, right? This is good for my children, this is good for future generations, this is good for the environment. And yet, nobody's taking a stand. And this is the status quo we have in sort of this anthropocentric, right, human-centric view of the world that we currently live within. And if we're not willing to challenge that as at the baseline, right, that yes, we're different. Yes, you and I are different. Yes,
but
every animal is different, but we're equal.
We should have respect for these wonderful creatures. You know, they are great. And certainly, I mean, you know, a poor animal that grows up in a farm, it's living a very, you know, whatever they call them these days, agribusiness. I mean, they're leading a very limited life, but the wild animals, I mean, my God, they're out there and they live in that world that, you know, we couldn't survive in for 2 days.
That's right, yeah. And, you know, people say, well, you know, we have always eaten meat, right? But the way that we understand how our culture, well, how many cultures, I can't speak for all cultures, obviously, but the way where I think the culture I'm speaking of comes from is one that I live in now of systemic violence in a mass-produced system, yes. Right? And that's where our meat comes from. And to me, that's not sustainable in any way. There's no humane washing of that. There's no green washing of it. And saying that, well, if we just all transition to small local farms, everything would be better. At the end of the day, these are individuals' lives we're talking about, right? Just like your cat or dog or anyone else, and they want to live, right? They want to live as much as your cat or dog does. And so,
which is as much as the rest of us do.
Absolutely, right? They have an interest in their lives that if we ignore that, then we're ignoring kind of the foundation of how we understand the moral value of an individual. You know, I think our moral integrity comes from how we treat the most vulnerable in our society, and non-human animals are the most vulnerable individuals in our society. And right now, we're treating them like garbage.
Jordan Reichert, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back. This is segment 3 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, October the 20th. I'd like to thank again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it happen every week. Our guest in this segment is Jeremy Arney. Jeremy is the leader of the Canadian Action Party.
Yeah.
Forgive me. The Canadian Action Party, and you guys participated in this election.
Yes.
Your main issue is an issue of tremendous importance, which is using the Bank of Canada to help to build the better Canada we all want, an issue that got virtually zero coverage anywhere in the media by any media or politician, and yet it's of tremendous importance. So do you want to just say a few words about the election and what you think the future holds, and then we'll do the questions?
Yeah, just very briefly on the Bank of Canada, because you brought it up. I'm not sure if you're aware, Jack, but your share of our national debt is $30,000. Just your share. So is mine. Everybody has that share. Prosperity and austerity do not go together, and we have for the last 30, 40 years been leading basically an austerity program in Canada. We have been wasting money hand over fist by not using our own bank. This is a subject for another time because we're short, but as far as the election is concerned, I think we saw a young man grow into the position over the period of the election. He didn't buckle under the weight that was thrown at him of the criticism, I'm not, or you're not ready, and all the rest of it. He stepped through, he appealed to the people, and he became the catalyst for the We Are Change, or no, for the desire for change. And as a result, he went from third position to Prime Minister. Good for him. How's it going to work out? I think we're going to find very quickly. On the 4th of November, he has said that he's going to announce his cabinet. I am very curious to know if there's going to be a whip, a government whip. The government whip's job is to make sure that everybody votes in the House the way the party wants them to vote. How many times has Justin said over the last couple of weeks, we want to represent the people to Ottawa, not Ottawa to the people, which incidentally is something the Canadian Action Party spawned a long time ago and we still believe. So it would be really interesting. If that's the case, there is no need for a whip for the Liberal Party. All they need is one person, which could be the House Leader, to ensure that there's a minimum of 5 members of the government sitting in the House of Commons in the chamber. And the reason for this is that if there's less than 5 people stand up to object to a motion and demand a vote, then any motion will automatically carry. So a bill could be killed just by there not being enough government people there to stand up and say, we want a full vote. That's the first thing. Will there be a whip?
This is very, very important, and actually I didn't know anything about it. So you're saying that Mr. Trudeau has said, in effect, that we want the people's representatives to represent the people.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's what he said in effect, and he's almost said it in those words. I mean, in his speech last night, he said, we want to represent the people to Ottawa, not Ottawa to the people.
Okay. So on November 4th, we are going to see if the Liberal Party has a whip. Whip's
yes,
job is to make sure that
so.
everybody does as they're told.
I believe the whip is part of cabinet. I know John Duncan was, and he was the whip. So, they'll have a whip or not, if certainly if they announce a cabinet and there's a whip, then you know that there's a reason there that he's basically saying we need to have everybody voting the same way.
You know, this is really a question for all Canadians, because the question is, do we want the people we elect to represent us, or do we want the people we elect to be controlled by the party elite who have no connection to us, because those people can destroy their career at any moment in time? Maybe, I mean, what can happen is we, the Canadian people, should really focus on that issue and say we want to change that rule so that you, the party leadership, does not control the people we elect.
Over the last 3-4 weeks, I've been talking to everybody I know just about, and people on the street too, pointing them into the absurdity of the situation of the way elections run today. That is, you get 3 major parties, all of whom putting out candidates that we are invited to interview and employ at $167,000 a year minimum to represent us to Ottawa. Now, of those 3 parties with their whips, there is not a hope in heck that they are going to represent us. They are going to do what their party whips are telling them. So why would anybody in their right mind want to give somebody a $167,000 a year salary to do exactly opposite to what they're being elected to do? It just doesn't make sense. The only parties that don't have whips is, first of all, is the Green, where Elizabeth May sent a letter to every candidate saying, you will not be whipped, so you can vote what your constituents want.
And you know what? That was never mentioned. That's important, and that's why we never heard anything in the media about Elizabeth May right through this whole campaign. They didn't want those ideas to be brought out.
This whole campaign was not about candidates. It was not about politicians. It was about 3 individuals. right from the word go, I actually wrote an open letter to Mr. Harper about this. Right from the word go, this was about the Prime Minister's job. It was nothing. The incidentals were the candidates who would build up to create the Prime Minister. But it was all about three men vying for that job of Prime Minister.
It's a great detriment to Canada that our political system is so undemocratic. It can be a lot better, and we can make it that. You wanted to talk about, do you mind if we go on to Bill C-51?
No, we can go on to Bill C-51. Bill C-51 is going to be a test of just how Trudeau is going to listen to the people. He has said that he wants to get rid of all the freedoms aspect of it. So is he going to do this right away? Is he going to leave it? What's he going to do? This will be really interesting to find out in his throne speech, how he's going to approach it. What I would like to see is him repeal everything after the business, right at the very beginning, where all the agencies can talk to each other. That makes sense. But again, it only on certain subjects. But that can be adjusted, and the rest of it should be repealed and gone. Won't go into it in great detail, but for instance, in the criminal aspect of things, where CSIS need to get a warrant, they have to go in front of all things the BC Supreme Court or the provincial Supreme Courts, not the federal courts, but the provincial ones, which puts the cost of all this onto the provincial governments. Now, if they can't get on a Friday evening one of the Supreme Court judges from BC, they start going down the line, and they get eventually to a JP. So a JP can give them a warrant, which Bill C-51 says is not going to be that easy to get. Well, Justice of the Peace doesn't matter. He gets paid by the warrant. And what is a Justice of Peace? If we check it all out and follow all this down in the laws, you find that a JP can be somebody who flies an airplane.
Now, not only that, but my understanding is that they can do a lot of things, like what you'd call dirty tricks, and really dirty tricks, with they can just do what they want. Am I wrong in that?
JPs?
No.
Oh,
CSIS agents.
Oh, yeah, well, we don't know. We have to guess because it's also hush-hush and secret. I mean, in the bill, it doesn't specify anything. And to give you an example, when James McIntyre was shot in Dawson Creek just a few months ago, because he was wearing an anonymous mask at a demonstration, he was shot and killed. And when Blaney, who was supposed to be the Minister of Public Safety, was asked about it, I'll get this right if I can, he said, those who choose to dissent can expect to face the full force of the law. Well, the full force of the law in this case was being shot dead. So I'm a dissenter. I figure that I have a target on my back with a bullseye in the middle, and any policeman who looks at me sideways is going to say, whoopee, he can go, bang, because I'm a dissenter. And Blaney will say, well, he chose to dissent. Well, Blaney has nothing to say with it.
So we'll see what Mr. Trudeau does with Bill C-51, which wasn't even an election issue, completely kept out of the election. I never heard it mentioned.
No, it wasn't an election issue basically because the election issues were controlled by one man. Right from the point on who's running. What's this election about? This election about one man. I would like to talk about the Senate because I've had this idea. I'll be very brief. This is an opportunity for someone who kicked his caucus members out of the Senate, or the Senate members out of his caucus. This is an opportunity for him to reach out to some of the NDP men who've done, or women for that matter, who've done phenomenal work over the years, like Peter Stouffer, for instance, a really respected NDP member of Parliament, an absolute champion of our veterans. He's lost his seat. This would be a time for Mr. Trudeau to reach out to him and say, Peter, how would you like to be a senator? To my way of thinking, it doesn't matter who he puts in there, because he has already said whoever goes in will not be part of my caucus. So this would be a mending the fences move of huge importance if he chooses to take it, to reach out to someone from perhaps Suzuki, some of the other NDP people from years ago. Not some of the younger NDP ones because they'd probably refuse because they'd want to come back again. Jack Harris, for instance, has lost too. Another man who's done sterling work for his community. I don't know if they are available if they are eligible for seats because they may not be available in their area. But this is the kind of thing that I would just love to see him do. Whether he's got the ability, well, he's got the ability, whether he's got the guts to do it or not, I don't know. But that would be a step in bringing back democracy and reinforcing the idea that the Senate can be a house of second thought.
We have less than a minute left, but just mention the TPP.
Oh my gosh,
Less than a minute
TPP,
left.
what a disaster. Well, you know, I've already told you before, any trade agreement that has an investor's protection, profit protection clause in it is a disaster for Canada. It's just going to cost us nothing but
So
money.
that should be something that Mr. Trudeau repeals immediately.
It should be. We don't know his stand on it really yet. He hasn't come out yet one way or the other. Hedging his bets, I guess.
Yeah.
But
This is what we're going to... Jeremy, thank you very much.
thank you for coming, Jack. Well, thank you for having me again, Jack.
And Jeremy Arney, the leader of the Canadian Action Party, thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Hello, I'm Will Smith. Thanks for coming back for the last segment of Citizens Forum. I'd like to thank all the sentients in our immediate vicinity and all over the universe for participating in this creation today of our reality. And today with us, who's going to participate in a big way, is Nick Karras. And he is writing a new book, and he'd like to talk to us about altered states of consciousness that are obtainable through something that's pretty easily accessible for most of us, even if it has some stigma in our current social scene. But he's going to talk about the changes of consciousness that we can experience with cannabis and sexuality. So here is Nick Karras.
Thanks for having me on the show, Will. Interesting topic, something I'm very passionate about. The book I'm working on, it's called A Passionate High, A Lover's Guide to Cannabis. And as a sexologist and an intimacy coach, I find cannabis can be a valuable tool to help couples reconnect and get back into the sensual selves.
So how did you get started with this? That's what I'm mostly curious about. What was the thing that got you started on this whole thing?
Well, I've been a cannabis user for quite a few years, and for me it has always had a sexual connotation to it. And I think it's been about 6 years now that I went back to school and got a doctorate in human sexuality. I had a tremendous interest, and as a sex coach, I'm not a therapist, but as a coach, I help couples realize how to connect. I give guide points to them and different methods of doing that. And it can be very difficult, especially after a couple of years of marriage. Intimacy gets harder for people. Life gets in the way, things get complicated, and most therapy involves talk therapy, where they'll try to get the couples to reconnect. A lot of therapists will recommend maybe have a date night, go home, have a glass of wine to try to relax. And I've always looked at alternative ways, and how does cannabis play a role in that? And I think it can be a very valuable tool.
Okay, now I have a question about one of the things that, as somebody who's been through I was raised during the 60s,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, we kind of have the idea that people are more sexually open or liberated than they were, but what I'm hearing you saying is they're still having trouble connecting.
Oh, even more so. There's studies being done right now that are saying that the average person today is having less sex than we did 30 years ago. It looks like we're having more. We're talking about it more. It's in the media more, but actual connection is not taking place at the numbers it did. And for most couples, the stress of everyday life today is much greater than it was back then. And even though we talk about it and we hint about it, by the end of the day, to get back into that place of connection, to get back into that place of self where we can do that, it's very difficult. And a lot of the books out there will tell you to plan a date night, to calm down, to relax, to change the environment. They're all powerful tools and they do work. And all I'm saying is that cannabis is another tool to have in your toolbox when used properly. Now,
Okay.
the interesting thing about cannabis, just like alcohol and most other things, is it can be overused, and then it becomes a suppressant, and it's something that we're dulling our senses. And I think most people who use cannabis use it to get high, to numb out. And they're usually smoking too much. To me, you can back that off, and it can be a valuable tool when used properly.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what about the stigma attached to something that's still illegal in most states in the United States and still illegal here?
Well,
except for
I think that's one of the big reasons that I'm doing the book. We have the stigma, but as every state legalizes, and the whole countries are going to legalize eventually, people are going to get curious and they're going to venture down that path. And what I find is most people, to use a term, they mess it up. They overindulge. They do edibles. They smoke too much, and they don't like the experience. It's just like the first couple times you drink. People tend to get way over intoxicated and get a bad, feeling about it, a bad experience from that. And most people do the same thing with cannabis.
Interesting. Okay, so who is this book? Whom did you write this book for? What's the target audience?
I think mainly for new users, and new people coming in, and experienced people. I think what I'm finding through all of my focus groups is most people don't understand the power of it. They use it to numb out, to check out. They come home after a hard day's work, they take a number of hits, and then they get couch locked, eat the Doritos, and they're enjoying that. And trust me, if that works for them, fine. All I'm saying is let's go back and look at it, pay attention to what's taking place. And what I've been studying is actually the high. A lot of people talk about medicinal value of cannabis, and they'll look at the CBDs and CBNs and how it can be used to cure cancer, but then they also talk about the recreational, and the recreational usually gets tagged as, I want to zone out from the stress of everyday life. I'm challenging that, and I'm saying that the high actually can be looked at as medicinal in relieving anxiety, in stress, calming down, when used in the right proportion.
Do you want to make a comparison with alcohol, for example? I think the thing that jumped into my mind was there's a line in Shakespeare about alcohol increases the desire but lessens the ability.
Most definitely. And usually we look at alcohol as a suppressant, and it's going to suppress a lot of the feelings and allow us to be more real with ourselves. Cannabis is fascinating what it does in the brain. It's neither a suppressant or it activates you. It goes where you go depending on the strain, the dosage, and the intention. And your curiosity with consciousness really is what led me down this too. I was always curious, what is the high? Why do I sometimes get anxiety? Why do I sometimes feel different when I smoke a different strain, a different dosage? And I'm finding that we can control that by using the proper strain, the right dosage, and mainly the intention. So what I cover in the book is that, first of all, it's a very individual thing. And cannabis is something that it's not like a quick pill. You can go to the pharmaceutical, get an anxiety drug and do that. Cannabis has a symbiotic relationship with the individual using it.
Interesting.
And by exploring the different strains and finding what works for you and keeping dosage very low and paying attention to what happens, you usually end up going from left side brain thinking, which is what we do all day long in work. Our society rewards left brain thinking, and cannabis kind of activates the right side of the brain, which is the more knowing, more conscious side and caring side of the brain. And in that, a lot of us are very unfamiliar with that. That's why sometimes first-time smokers who smoke cannabis get scared. They're uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with the high because it's a feeling of trust. There's a great quote out there that says, cannabis is the gateway drug to thyself.
Interesting.
And that to me is what I've noticed, is that if we're conscious, don't smoke too much. And one of the problems we have, especially in most of the world, is that cannabis has been cultivated to get the high. So most of the cannabis that we see that's sold, that was on the streets, has a very high THC level. And it's to zone you out. If you want to use it as a conscious tool, and especially for intimacy, you need to tone that THC level down and find cannabis that has a higher CBD, CBN, and especially the terpenes. There's over a couple hundred elements in cannabis, and when they work in an entourage effect, and they can be a very powerful tool for consciousness.
It sounds kind of like it's going to be like wine, where you have all these different ways of describing what the wine is like. And
most definitely. And just like everybody has a particular wine that they like, somebody like a Merlot, somebody like, Chardonnay.
Right.
Cannabis is going to be the same thing. It's a journey, and part of the book and part of what I do cannabis coaching, is to help people find out what their relationship is. I mean, somebody who's a very anxious person compared to someone who's a very mellow person, the same cannabis is not going to have the same effect on those two people.
Well, that's very interesting. Do you think that you live in California, right?
Yeah,
So
I
it's
do.
still technically illegal for just for recreational use in California, but there's some legality for the medicinal use, right?
Yes, you can get a card and you can do that. Accessibility to cannabis has never really been an issue for anybody who wants to smoke it. What I'm looking for with legalization, where they can finally do studies on it. Science,
Right.
there is so much wonderful things in the science of it, and until the federal government in the United States and all over the world allows the studies, I think they're going to find incredible uses for this.
Well, I'd like to look at cannabis as a real change in consciousness, because thinking about it, I think that, or I heard somebody talk about it, and it was challenged, a user challenged. Somebody said, well, doesn't it make you just lethargic and you don't want to do anything at all? And he said, no, really what happens is you take a look at what you're doing and you decide that you don't want to do some of those things anymore. And he said, I think that's one of the reasons that it's illegal. So do you have any comments about that, about how I look at this as something that perhaps is just part of a response to what we've done to the planet.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
could you comment on that, about that?
I personally have a real respect for this, and I've been doing a lot of focus groups where I'll bring people in, 20, 25 people into a room who smoke cannabis and have been doing it for a long time, and ask them about their relationship with it. And quite frankly, I'm amazed at what I hear, that it does get them in tune with themselves. They become more caring. They're more concerned with the environment. They're more aware. They're more aware, and I think that to me is why it has been suppressed. I mean, really, if you go back and look at it, it was suppressed during Nixon in '71, and it was during the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And that's when most American boys were introduced to this over there, and they came back, and it was hard for us to continue with that war and smoke cannabis at the same time. It awakened a consciousness in us.
Can you just give us a quick, we've got a few seconds left, but could you just tell us where we can say the title again and where we might look for it when it's out?
Yeah, it's called thepassionatehigh.com.
Passionatehigh.com. Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
It's
very
been a pleasure.
interesting.
Thank you.